Hey guys, again, what's going on? I don't even know how to start out the introduction for this episode. I know what I'm thinking of saying, but I don't know how to do an introduction for it. So I guess it's time for the first thoughts. When I first heard about this episode, all I knew from the title was that it had to be a Pinkie Pie episode. Aside from that, I've been completely in the dark. I've been a little busy this week, so I haven't even watched any spoilers or anything like that. But before I started watching the episode, I did look on the MLP wiki to see who the new writer was, because Pinkie Pie episodes need good writers. Or, usually. I've seen Pinkie Pie's character, written interestingly in the past, and since everything that goes into the show is going to be canon, I figured I like to see the canon as close as possible as it was to Pinkie Pie in Season 1. That's just my personal opinion. But from a less biased standpoint, Pinkie Pie is a character. Characters need to act like characters rather than just objects that make people laugh. And in this episode, and you know what? Through most of Season 5, Pinkie Pie has been a character. Any comic relief she was possibly used for was very Pinkie Pie-like in the first place, and the two episodes that featured Pinkie Pie most, they both portrayed Pinkie Pie pretty well, but that's a subject I'll get to in a second. Anyway, so I didn't know what to expect from this episode, and what I got was satisfactory. First, let's talk about the Yaks and their freaking behavior, since the Yaks were pretty much the main thing in the episode. Okay, I first saw the models, I thought, okay, that's cool, and I heard how they talked, and then I thought, okay... And then I saw how they acted, and I thought, there is something wrong here. Not with the writing, just they're so rude, and everyone just lets them get away with it, too. Another idea is that it just might be normal that in their culture, if you try to imitate it, it's considered disrespectful unless you can actually do it right. But, Anyway, the Yak culture and everything seems interesting. We never really got to see much of it, but we did hear enough about it, and it's obviously like some kind of barbaric style or whatever. But it does seem like something interesting to explore. But anyway, I don't know if it's just because these Yaks were royal and thus spoiled or something, but honestly, this ties into that moral from Suited for Success, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. The ponies did their very best to try to make them feel at home, and they showed absolutely no gratitude for it. To be honest, this is where I thought the moral was heading. I thought that maybe they'd be able to say, hey, what you're doing is rude, we're trying to give you something generously, and you're completely and utterly being ungrateful. I don't know if this is because of the Yak culture, or if it's because, as I said, they might just be spoiled, but either way, I figured it'd be corrected, or at least, someone would say something about it, even if it wasn't to their faces. But since we've already had an episode saying not to be overly critical of something that's given to you, I can understand why that wasn't the moral this time around. But again, I'm getting off subject. We have a new writer this episode, Nick Confaloni? I don't know how to pronounce his name. But either way, whoever did this obviously pulled it off. It looked like everyone was pretty much in character. I have little to no complaints about anything that was portrayed in this episode. Everyone seemed to be great. I have no idea what that Twilight Quesadilla part was about. But that brings me to another point. The humor in this episode was entertaining. I really enjoyed it, honestly. But enough about everybody else's character. Let's talk about Pinkie Pie. She was obviously the main highlight of the episode, aside from the Yaks, and I think that Season 5 has been portraying Pinkie Pie so excellently. And when I say this, I'm going to do my best not to say it from the standpoint of, well, she should act this way because of this and that. Instead, I'm going to try to tackle this from a writing standpoint, rather than from a, she's not acting like she is in Season 1 standpoint, because I'm trying my best to be objective. And honestly, from a writing standpoint, My Little Pony has always had all of the characters acting, as I said, just like characters. Unfortunately, and yes, I'm going a little bit more in depth with what I said earlier, Pinkie Pie, even though she started out as a character that was just happy and bubbly, ended up sort of being used as a comedy object rather than a cute character. There's nothing wrong with comic relief, but there's a way to make a comic relief character without making them into just an object, For example, let's see. That pointless part in, the Season 4 opener, am I wrong? Where everyone was looking for something extremely important, and Pinkie Pie was over there coloring and saying, oops! Missed the spot, and continuing on. Was that part of her character? Sure. Was it in character? Perhaps, and if it wasn't, it is now. But that was pointless, and it was using her as an object. I like to be able to get in depth with all of Pinkie Pie's scenes and really be able to analyze her, because I think that when she's one of the more interesting characters in the show. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this scene. In fact, I can see why the writers put it in. It was something cute to also lighten the mood considering something serious was going on. That's completely fine. Everything's cool with that. But if you compare it to something like Pinkie Pride or almost every episode from Season 1, it seems a little bit more shallow. An even better example of the object instead of a character idea would have to be that spit take scene from the Season 3 finale.
Hold on a second.
That was probably one of the most shallow, and I don't like to use the word shallow, but in my opinion, it was one of the most shallow scenes that Pinkie Pie has played in. Just that one spit take scene was obviously something put in just randomly for comic relief, and it wasn't even all that funny, honestly. I mean, you can always take something from Pinkie Pie's character using these scenes. That's why I'm saying it's not inherently bad. But you can tell when somebody's writing a character in order to keep them as a character, or when they're writing a character to use them as a comedy relief object. And there are ways to do comic relief without using them as strictly a tool. You can keep them as a character while doing comedy relief. In fact, this has been done plenty of times in My Little Pony with Pinkie Pie. In fact, it would be hard for me to cite all the examples that they've used her as comic relief without making her feel shallow or object-like. She's been used fantastically so many times because Lauren Faust, in the very beginning, designed a character that was supposed to be used for some comic relief, but who was more so a real character with her own personality and her own past, even her own worries and possibly even regrets, even if we haven't seen too many regrets yet. She truly is her own character, and she's not just comic relief. There have been so many other cartoons, and there are so many cartoons, that use some characters as just comic relief tools and nothing else. Pinkie Pie, thankfully, is not one of those cases. I'm trying to emphasize that. But there are certain times when she is written just a little bit more, well, like that. But what I was getting to is that in Season 5, she seems more genuine. Any comic relief she's been a part of has been typical Pinkie Pie comic relief, but it hasn't been too over the top, and it kept her as a character. She's a comic relief character, not just a comic relief tool. And so far, most of the time, Season 5 has done a good job doing that. By the way, she totally saved Cherry Jubilee's life, even for just a second. If she hadn't gone with her, Cherry Jubilee could have died. Because if she wasn't there, they might have fallen quicker, and the Wonderbolts might not have seen them, in alternate timeline, blah 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 blah. Speaking of Pinkie Pie's character, she has a party cave. She takes her parties so seriously. I think that's a great bit of information we found out about Pinkie. She's planning anniversaries for her parents for the next, 500 years or something. Now, that could just be Pinkie Pie being Pinkie Pie and planning ahead regardless of how illogical it might seem. Or maybe ponies can live longer than we thought they could? I still want to get some kind of measurement on a pony's lifespan. Seriously, how old is Granny Smith again? Anyway, that was just really cute. I really liked it. And honestly, it shows that Pinkie Pie, even though she seems really out of whack and kind of disorganized, she really has her stuff together when it comes to parties. When it comes to her passion. And that's not even unrealistic either. I know that there are people out here in the real world who seem kind of out of it, but then when they're in their zone, they are in their zone and they know what they're doing. Kind of like me. I mean, I'm a klutz. I bump into things, knock things down, mess up all the time, and fairly forgetful. But when it comes to art and working with my hands, I try to get every single detail without messing up. It's the same with Pinkie Pie. She's really out of control and everything sometimes, but when she really does work with her passion, she opens up. I'd love to see her writing these notes and planning these things and organizing all of this. That's just an extra thing to add to her character. I seriously gotta do some kind of character analysis on Pinkie Pie. Anyway, so we went over my first thoughts and every pony's character with the new writer and Pinkie Pie's character and the party cave, but what's bad about the episode? Well, I'm not going to say bad necessarily. I think this episode was really fun. One thing that I really have to say, though, is Applejack. I know that this is nitpicking, I know, but this just really gets to me every single time that it happens. Applejack is the element of honesty, and we've seen that she has meticulously done her best to go around lying. I mean, just check out the last Roundup episode. She said she would tell everyone at breakfast, and she didn't want to tell everyone. So what did she do? Since she said she would tell them at breakfast, I guess the only logical way to make sure that she didn't really lie or break any promises would be to not go to breakfast. Because she said that she would tell them at breakfast, so if she doesn't go to breakfast, she doesn't tell them. I mean, sure, that was kind of a jerk way to go about it in a weird way, but seriously, she went that far to try to make sure she didn't break a promise, because she's Applejack, the element of honesty. And even though that was kind of dishonest, it was probably the most honest way you could go about doing something dishonest. And because that was so tediously gone about, I feel like all of that just sort of goes down the drain when she blatantly tells some kind of lie, even just a little white one. Sometimes I feel like there are times when Applejack and Rainbow Dash need to trade lines. What I'm talking about is that when Twilight wanted to know how everything was going, all of the characters knew that it wasn't going well, but their answers went in a descending fashion from, "It's going alright, I think," to, "It's terrible." which was a cute bit of writing. But Applejack was the one to say, "It's going okay," and honestly I don't think that she believed that, and I know that nobody else believed that it was going okay either. And Rainbow Dash was the one to say, "It could be better." That's like a nice way of saying that it is not going well. And knowing that, and knowing that Applejack didn't want to be rude, I think that that should have been Applejack's line. I can imagine Applejack saying that, it could be better, but instead she took the forefront and said, it's going okay. Then again, there is one other option, which is that Applejack is being very optimistic. I will accept this option. We have seen her do something similarly before, so I will just leave it at that. And the last thing I have something to say about is the sled. I mean, I know that it's Pinkie Pie, and I know that this is a cartoon, but the fact that Pinkie Pie returned all the way back where she started was a very, 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 very important part to the plot. And the fact that the way that she got back like that was because of a cartoony point that would have never happened because the sled does have friction, or so I assume. I just think that while that was cute and everything, and while it almost felt right because everything that she went through was erased really quickly, and that's always, I don't know, it feels like a good piece of pacing for some reason. Still, it's weird knowing that the entire ending point of the plot would not exist if it weren't for something that should not have happened anyway. In fact, that's almost as bad as if she were to get there, and then some invisible force picks her up and puts her back in Ponyville. I mean, sure, this can be explained a lot easier than that, but what I'm trying to get to is that neither one makes much sense, and it's basically like saying, well, I guess I'm back here because the plot wanted me back here. I'm here because the writers said, Pinkie Pie, you need to be back here, so we're just gonna pull you here. That's like saying that you went all the way around the world using only a plane and some boats, and the rest was completely walking, and you went all the way to China, and then out of nowhere you fall through a hole that leads through the center of the earth, and you end up back in America. And then the hole fills with rocks because of an avalanche or something. It was really cute, and it was really entertaining. But from an analytical standpoint, and from a storytelling standpoint, from a writing standpoint, I can say that I kind of wish they had done something different. But also from an analyzing standpoint, I'm going to say that it makes sense because magic. My only problem is that we know that this is not going to be explained ever, or rather, if it is, I will be very surprised and impressed. And even justifying it with magic sounds weird, because we don't even know if Yaks have magic. In fact, it'd probably be safe to assume that they don't. And apparently they haven't opened their borders for hundreds of moons or something like that. And no pony has been there, according to Twilight. The only logical explanation would be some random Yaks traveling and bringing back some souvenirs, like a random magically enchanted sled that is so good at sledding because it has no friction, and that may magically turn to avoid walls and objects, because I know that there was not a straight path to Ponyville. Unless there was, in which case, excuse me, show. Anyway, I'm going to drop this because it doesn't stop the episode from being fun, and it's not really too big of a deal. But just for the record, it is very frustrating when a very important part of the plot only exists because the writers didn't know how else to do it, so they had to make it very obvious that there are giant writers in the sky that are making things happen. I think a writer's job is to make themselves as inconspicuous as possible, making the world feel like it's moving on its own without any help from godly beings, like the writers. But anyway, to the conclusion. There were two morals that I expected that this episode might have. The first being very similar to Suited for Success, as I said, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And the second being the fact that the ponies don't need to make things look like Yakistan, because the whole point of visiting another place is to experience the culture that you've just been thrown into. And that it isn't their job to impress the Yaks by showing them how greatly they can represent Yak culture. It's their job to show them why Ponyville is such a great place, why Equestria is such a great place, why they call it their home. So that was the other moral that I was expecting, and, well, that's what it was. But I do wish that some pony, at least one time, mentioned that they should be more grateful for the fact that they're working so hard for them. Granted, that's an unspoken truth, but I would have really liked to hear it at least one time. I've noticed that with MLP episodes, multiple times throughout every single season, there have been episodes with more than one lesson to be learned, but they only really mention one of them. And that's fine, because there should be one moral to the end of every episode. That's completely cool and all that. But it seems like they don't even mention or address any other very important lessons that may have been learned in the episode. I'm not saying all of them. I mean, theoretically, you could learn a lot from a lot of these episodes. But I'm saying that sometimes there's at least two very important lessons to be learned. Like in Sweet and Elite, the lesson that was meant to be taught was that you are a product of your home, it made you who you are, and there's no reason to be ashamed of where you came from. But there was something else very important in there that I was surprised wasn't addressed. And that is, there is no reason to lie to your friends. They will understand if you have something important to you. Rarity ended up lying to not just the Canterlot ponies, but her friends, in order to make sure that neither one found out about each other. In reality, if she had told them, I'm sure they could have worked something out. That's what friends are there for. That's what they do. There shouldn't be any reason to lie to them about something like that. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of it because this isn't the episode I'm reviewing, but basically that's a very important lesson that wasn't really addressed. This episode is very much the same way, with the main lesson and then a side lesson that wasn't really mentioned. But regardless, the episode was still very fun. I hope you all enjoyed it, because I did, honestly. I've been satisfied with Pinkie Pie throughout Season 5, and I've been satisfied with a good amount of the other characters too most of the time. So anyway, that's what I think. Tell me what you thought. Whether you agree, whether you disagree, what your opinions are. I'm always interested. Positive or negative. Either way, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.